In this video, we will review documenting constructors and methods within the Java programming language. It is useful to document what the defaults are of a constructor if it has no parameters, since not everyone will have access to the source code when they come to use your API. Let's create a timer class in the package com.vtc.demo. We're going to go to File, Submenu, New, by right-clicking on the package, select the class option. We're going to name it Timer. As we can see, we have no constructor, and remember that if a class contains no constructor declaration, then a default constructor that takes no parameters is automatically provided implicitly by Java. It invokes the superclass constructor with no arguments. The constructor has the same access as its class. Let's run the Java doc and open its index.html page in the Eclipse web browser. I'm going to go to the File menu bar and go to the Project menu and select Generate Java Doc. It already has pre-selected the project, so I can just click Finish. As we can see here, now we have our doc folder. We're going to open up our index.html by right-clicking on it and selecting Open with Web Browser. Here we have our timer class, and let's look at the timer default constructor. As we can see, the Java doc provides for an implicit constructor, no description. The Java doc tool generates documentation for default constructors. When it documents such a constructor, Java doc leaves its description blank because a default constructor can have no doc comment. As we can see here, we have no description at all. Two reasons to always add a default explicit constructor. The first reason is good programming practice dictates that code should never make use of implicit default constructors in public APIs. All constructors should be explicit. All default constructors in public and protected classes should be turned into explicit constructor declarations with the appropriate access modifier. Let's add an explicit default constructor to our timer class. Now our timer class has a default explicit constructor. The second reason to add an explicit default constructor is because this explicit declaration also gives you a place to write documentation comments. The question arises, how do you add a doc comment for an implicit default constructor? The simple answer is that it's not possible. And conveniently, our programming convention is to avoid default constructors. So here we have the second reason to add an explicit default constructor, to describe and document the default behavior of our class at initialization. Let's add default behavior to our timer class and also document that behavior. First, we will create two variable instances, string time and a boolean to tell us whether the alarm is on. Now let's initialize our instance variables so that they can always have a value as soon as the object's created. Alarm on will be false and time will be 12 a.m. Now I'm going to add a description to our constructor. The default behavior is a one-line description of what this object does. I can even use HTML tags to describe each of the instance variables. Here I'm using a bulleted list or just a list in HTML. And I'm describing each one of the instance variables and what their default values are. Now let's take a look at what the Java doc provides for an explicit constructor and see what it generates. Again, I'm going to go to Project, Generate Java Doc. My project is already selected. I click Finish. This time I'm going to right click on it, select Refresh from the submenu, and I'm going to open it and open index.html. Open with web browser. Click on our timer class, and as we can see here, now we have a description of the default behavior of this object. If I scroll down, I can also see in greater detail the description and our bulleted list for each and every one of our instance variables. Now let's add a method and document it. Remember that documenting your code is crucial to help you and others understand it, and even to remind yourself how your older programs worked. So let's go ahead and create our method and document it. We're going to go back to our class timer. We're going to create a public static int calcInt function that takes two variables, int a and b, throws an exception, and returns the addition of a and b. Now, as we can see, Eclipse already generated much of the documentation. Here I can add a description for each of the parameters passed. I can also describe what this method will be returning. In this case, it would be a negative 0 or positive integer. And I can even add the author here. The first line, of course, would be the description of the method. JavaDoc is useful when you've deprecated part of your code. You can use the @deprecated tag to make JavaDoc show a program element as deprecated. The @deprecated tag must be followed by a space or new line. In the paragraph following the @deprecated tag, explain why the item has been deprecated and suggest what to use instead. Let's write a method and then let's deprecate it. Public int my method will be what we will use as the old method. In this scenario, we will assume that we created another method, which will now be the new method used by our system or API. Now I'm going to deprecate my old method with the @deprecated tag. I can always put a description such as of release 1.8.1, it's been replaced by, I can use the @link tag here, and as you see, Eclipse even brings up the submenu, and I can choose the method, the brand new method, to overwrite it. We can see that Eclipse understands our deprecated method and displays it appropriately by striking it out. This concludes our discussion of documenting constructors and methods in Java.